Hey, how's it going everyone? It's me, it's Jinsula. I hope you're having a good day and welcome to today's Pokemon GO discussion video. Okay, so I just got back from Los Angeles, California. I have to tell you the food is phenomenal, especially in K-Town. And the people are very interesting as well, but that's besides the point. I wanted to talk about Shadow Mewtwo Raids because I did a ton of those over the weekend and I really feel like there's a lot of good things that Niantic did with them and a couple of bad things as well. I really hope this video is extremely constructive because I do think there is a lot of potential with this new style of raiding. Alright, so with that said, let's roll the intro and get right into it. Okay, so the big thing that happened this past weekend was, of course, the introduction of Shadow Mewtwo in Shadow Raids, and a lot of people were really hyped up around this in light of all of the controversies that Niantic has currently been facing. I really do think there was a lot of good things that Niantic did with this new feature, and I really do want to highlight them, mainly because I want to see raids improve, especially because Niantic is starting to move away from remote raiding. And I really do think that if they want raiding and the game to succeed, then they need to lean in on what is actually successful. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. First and foremost, shiny Shadow Raids. Like, that's kind of the big deal with Shadow Raids, like people trying to go for those shiny shadows. Mewtwo was definitely one that a lot of people were raiding for. And I really feel like when it comes to Shadow Mewtwo, the excitement behind that specific Pokemon was already done and over with from the past Go Fests, and I really feel like what really made these exciting was, of course, the potential for a shiny Shadow version of it. Of course, the rate at which you get a shiny Shadow Mewtwo seemed a little bit lower than what you would typically see with regular legendaries, at least that's how it was for me, but that was definitely the selling point behind these raids over the weekend. I was lucky enough to get one shiny Shadow Mewtwo over the weekend. It was actually on the very last raid that was available before the event ended, so I certainly feel a bit relieved, but also a little bit disappointed because I really wanted to get multiples of shiny Shadow Mewtwo, specifically because I wanted the potential of getting a Shundo or something close if I were to purify it. Of course, I did not get that. I ended up with a shiny Shadow Mewtwo with horrible IVs, and that's okay, at least I have one in my collection. But for the hardcore players out there who would have wanted to use this in, let's say, PvP, yeah, that would have felt very disappointing. So the first bit of criticism that I have for Shadow Mewtwo Raids was, of course, the IV floor. Having an IV floor of 6, 6, and 6, I can understand being a balance issue, but in general, it did kind of deflate some of the excitement that players were feeling throughout the day. I feel like if they were to have increased it just a little bit more, maybe to about 8, 8, and 8, I felt like that would have been more generous and it would have maintained some of the hype that was lost between the weeds, because a lot of players were more specifically looking for high IVs of Shadow Mewtwo rather than just a bunch of junk ones. But like I've said many times before on my YouTube channel, even a 100% IV purified regular Mewtwo is still not going to hold a candle to even a 0% IV Shadow Mewtwo. So even getting a Shadow Mewtwo that is 6, 6, and 6 is still going to be extremely valuable for your collection. I just kind of wish that little bit of info was more well known within the Pokemon GO community, because among some of the people that I played with, I did feel a lot of disappointment because people were not getting the higher IVs. Now, one thing that I did want to point out that was an extreme positive was that there was a lot of in-person raiding over the weekend. Of course, I was playing in Santa Monica as well as Los Angeles, so there was naturally going to be a lot of raiding activity. There's just a huge community of players out there, but I felt like for rural players and people who live in low populated areas, they're going to have an extremely hard time taking down this boss, and I really felt for them. Like, this was definitely an exciting raid weekend, and I felt like a lot of players missed out on that. So yeah, even though I think of the in-person experiences as a bit of a positive, I feel like the lack of allowing people from rural areas to remote in, that was a huge negative. Actually, yeah, let's move on to that. So, the lack of remote raiding when it came to this weekend. I felt like Niantic should have at least allowed some remote raiding when it comes to this weekend, mainly because when it comes to Shadow Mewtwo, it is an extremely valuable Pokemon, and for people who live in rural areas to be completely closed off from that, I just felt like that was a very bad move. Honestly, I saw it in some of my local Discord chats, like people were really disappointed that you couldn't remote in because they were either stuck at work or they had some other prior obligations because it was Memorial Day weekend. Like, they wanted to raid Shadow Mewtwo, but they couldn't, and they were willing to fork out the extra Pokecoins for those remote raid passes, but they were just not even able to do so because Shadow Mewtwo raids were in person only. Again, I felt like that was a huge misstep, and I really wish Niantic would have reconsidered that certain aspect of it, but unfortunately they did not, so a lot of players were going to miss out on this special raid. In the future, I feel like they should lift those kind of restrictions when it comes to big, high-value Pokemon like Shadow Mewtwo. Like, if they were to bring in Shadow Rayquaza in raids, for example, it's going to be a huge missed opportunity if they were to limit it to in-person raids once again. I really feel like this is the one aspect that was definitely sour when it came to this raid weekend, because the hype was definitely there and there was definitely a lot of in-person raiding activity, but it would have been nice to include some players who are just not able to come out. Now, another point of feedback that I wanted to give regarding Shadow Raids in general is that I really like this whole Purified Gem system. It keeps the gameplay a lot more dynamic, and it felt like there was a need for some communication between players, because like there were instances where nobody was using Purified Gems when the Shadow Mewtwo was enraged, and there were people calling it out like, hey, use your Purified Gems, and people started doing so. And yeah, there were interactions like that that I felt like were very unique, and I would love to see more stuff like that when it comes to raid battles. If they want to emphasize in-person experiences, then they need to think along those lines. Like, they need to think about ways that players can immediately communicate with each other to make the gameplay feel a lot more dynamic and a lot more challenging, and also a lot more rewarding. During some of my Shadow Mewtwo raids, I did actually feel a sense of community. Like, I was able to chat with some players and get to know some of them, and yeah, we were able to interact. Like, if that was Niantic's aim, that was pretty cool. But you know, I just feel like at the end of the day, there's always going to be some people who fall through the cracks, and those are the players that I feel like Niantic need to think about. Like for myself, even though I was from a completely different city and I did not know how the raid scene actually is within Santa Monica or Los Angeles, like I was pretty lucky. Like I was able to jump into raids that were able to fill up really quick. But I can imagine that if you're living in like one of the most rural areas of California or Illinois or Wisconsin, what have you, and there's only one gym for the entire town, yeah, it's going to be extremely difficult to even communicate to local players to do raids at those gyms. So I really feel like Niantic needs to kind of step outside of this mindset that they have to make everything only in person, find a way to get rural players involved in some way. Maybe you could have remote raids only be allowed for people who live in low populated areas. Who knows how they could pull that off, but I think there's some things that they could do to make the gameplay feel a lot more inclusive. And yeah, I felt like there was just a lot of positive things with Shadow Mewtwo Raids. It was just a couple of things that kind of soured the experience, at least for my local communities. But in any case, yeah, these are just all of my thoughts regarding Shadow Mewtwo Raids. Again, I had a blast playing out in California. There's definitely a good crowd of Pokemon Go players out there. I really do think that when it comes to Pokemon Go, there are some pluses that we can lean on when it comes to whether or not this game is going to succeed in the future. But there's also a lot of issues and a lot of problems that I really hope Niantic is being mindful of. Hopefully they are taking in a lot of our feedback and coming up with new ways to make the gameplay feel a lot more fun. Because, yeah, I felt like there was a lot of potential for Shadow Mewtwo Raids to become the next big thing. It's just unfortunate because the lack of remote raiding definitely hindered some of that hype. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Let me know your thoughts regarding Shadow Mewtwo Raids down below in the comments. I would love to know, and let's have a great discussion. And if you ended up enjoying this video, make sure you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if it's your first time here. And don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support my channel in any way, big or small, then do consider checking out the links in the description below. And yeah, that's going to be it. I'm Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I'll catch you all later.